Let's go north of the border. Let's go to Canada and talk about Dictator Trudeau. Many Canadian viewers watching right now very concerned about the future of this country, obviously, as it relates to internet censorship and the internet censorship bill, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But really, this FBI story and as it relates to the trucker convoy is a stunning revelation over the past few hours.
Well, new reports, in fact, do show that the FBI provided assistance to the Canadian government to police the trucker convoy. That is the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation helping its neighbor to the north to track people who were exercising their right to protest. Now, recall that these protests were against vaccine mandates. Sorry, let me scoot in the frame for you. Better?
Yes, she's always half of her face. Half of her face is always in the shot.
I'm doing it. I'm fine. I'm talking to you just fine. And then, so while I'm doing this, Clayton is always going like this.
Yeah, just see that giant monitor right there
with
half of your face in the shot.
Okay,
you're not in the shot.
Is this better?
Just put your head in the shot.
This is good.
There you go.
All right, roll that tape again if you don't mind. Okay.
All right, so FBI Trudeau. Tell us about this report.
Okay. Recall that these were protests last winter that were against vaccine mandates for truckers. These are people who barely get by in the first place, people who worked during lockdowns. In fact, we had a viewer who has a trucking company and says so many of his trucks are parked because of the diesel shortage, because of surging prices. We know they don't operate on huge profits anyway. These people that worked during lockdowns, and they were protesting mandates for them to take a vaccine if they do not want to. Many of them were vaccinated. They just didn't think it was right to mandate them to be vaccinated.
So they were standing up for other people, their comrades.
Many of them were, in fact.
Right.
By some estimates, it was even half that were vaccinated that were standing up for their industry. The government called them extremists. They tracked them.
White supremacists.
They seized their bank accounts. And apparently the U.S. government was in on that action, too, because if you're, the U.S. government, that sounds fun. Canadian news outlet CBC reported this from a report that came from a February 11th discussion between Canadian law enforcement agencies. The report said that there was a, quote, foreign element aiding law enforcement. The meeting was about the threat level to politicians and whether, in fact, some needed extra security. A lot of it is redacted, and because that's the name of our show, I get excited to show you redacted documents.
Wow, there's so much information on this redacted document.
Right, and so it talks about...
Why do they even bother?
Well,
all you got to do is hold it up to the light.
Right.
I'm interested in what's
Put lemon
there.
juice on it.
Hold on, I'm going to try that, see if I can do that.
Okay.
No, it's not working.
That's not going to help you.
No. You need paper. I guess you need paper for that.
So the first page is about, so-and-so politician and so-and-so politician. Do we need to actually give them extra security? And then there's this, maybe these threats. I don't know what this is. I'm guessing it had to do with threat levels. And then it sort of concludes, it says a question was raised regarding the demonstration's threat level, but it suggests that the threat has been significantly mitigated. And it goes on to say, we do think that a lot of this sort of extremist language has been taken off of graffiti. We do think that more of the dangerous rhetoric has been ratcheted down and that the threat level is lower. But that's not at all what Prime Minister Trudeau was saying at the time.
Right.
He, in fact, was calling protesters violent and extreme. And again, that just doesn't seem, according to this document, to be what law enforcement was observing. Although they did say, we didn't think that this would get as big as it did. We thought it would just sort of be a blip and then, wow, this is bigger than we thought. And this is where it mentions U.S. involvement. It says, the service indicated that while there was a foreign element, it primarily stemmed from financial support coming from the United States. Why exactly did the United States have to support the Canadian government to, push back against lawful protesters?
Because they're all part of the World Economic Forum. They're all puppets for the WEF. They're all in the tank for it. It's all just one big organism, the United States, Canada.
Well, that's a logical explanation, but in a granular level, why would they say that was worth United States taxpayer dollars? I mean, I get what you're saying. That's an umbrella viewpoint.
Because they don't give a shit about Americans and taxpayer dollars. I mean, look, we just had the story that was it Ecuador? The United States State Department is doing drag shows. Or is it Ecuador?
It was in Ecuador.
Yeah, like, so that taxpayers are paying for the United States State Department to put on drag shows in Ecuador.
Okay, but then what do you get from this if you're the FBI?
You get data and surveillance, and you get control, right? That's what these guys want. They want data, surveillance, and control. And when you have that control, you can monitor who's coming across the border, who's been vaccinated, who's a rabble-rouser that could potentially come into the United States.
Well, they get data they may not have otherwise had access to. And we know how the United States government, the CIA and the FBI likes to sort of dragnet data on their own citizens. And if they're given an opportunity to reach across the border. Now, what they had said around the time was that nearly half of the support for this trucker convoy was coming from U.S. citizens and U.S. dollars. And so how did they know that? Well, they knew that obviously because the FBI was watching it, was monitoring it, not just the social media and the connections, but also the money. This screen, if we can go back to it, says further, the Ottawa Police Service was in regular contact with CSIS, and their intelligence had been embedded into the service's overall intelligence posture. And that redacted piece was being suggested on social media, and they were closely observing that aspect. So while people were sort of rallying themselves on social media, the government was watching, not just that. When it mentions here CSIS, that is Canada's spy agency, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. So, the two were sort of working in cahoots. This February 11th meeting came around the same time, again, that it was reported that most of the donations were from outside of Canada and from the United States. And then, guess what? A lot of those American companies that hosted crowdfunding for the trucker convoy, then those things were seized. You better believe that the United States government had something to do with finding out where that money came from. I mean, I guess as Americans, you can just consider yourself lucky that they didn't reach into your bank account and, freeze that money too, if you had anything to do with it. But you also have to think, now, this next screen I'm going to show you said it was from this meeting. It said it was noted at the time of the convoy's arrival that there was no intelligence that suggested the demonstration would turn into the occupation that it would become. So they said there are blind spots here, cumulative blind spots, that they just didn't think it would become this big. And so I don't know what, they should have looked more closely. They didn't see this happening, but I have to wonder, given the fact that there were,
did they just think all these Canadians were compliant and they just would fall in line with it?
I don't know. I can't tell you what anyone thought, but my question is, there were inspired demonstrations in the United States that came up right after this. There were truckers who said, we're going to do the same thing. We're inspired by our Canadian brethrens. And those did not get the same level of...
well, there was no media coverage of it.
Well, of course, I guess we can't say how big it is. Something is based on the media coverage, but was the FBI able to tamp those down based on the data that it collected from the Canadian?
Yeah, I don't know how we would figure that out, right? I mean,
it's just a question.
Because it was pretty big. It rolled through Washington, and there just was no media coverage of it.
Yes,
and now that we know
they didn't have the same. It didn't have the same duration. There weren't as many blockades put up. It didn't seem to stop down, regular life as it did in Ottawa. And so is that because there was already intelligence that was gained from surveillance in the United States of the original movement?
It's possible. It's possible. I mean, and, Canada continues on a whole other front, which is around this internet censorship bill. So, the chorus of Canadians, as the Toronto Sun is reporting this weekend, the chorus of Canadians from all walks of life now calling on the Senate in Canada to kibosh the Trudeau government censorship bill. Now there's 40,000 signatures so far. We will link it up in the description of today's show after the show, so you guys can sign it if you are Canadian. You want to kill the bill, which is C11 in its current form. And basically, the legislation is due for the opponents of this say, but I think clearly you understand now there's been enough weighing in on this from legal experts to say that what it does is they say it's to support content creators, right? That's the whole point. We're going to support content creators. and make sure that our cultural sectors work for Canadians and supports the next generation of artists and creators. Of course, that's not at all how this thing is actually unfolding. The Winnipeg Free Press says it's clear that Trudeau doesn't care about Canadian content creators at all. It invades Canadians' privacy. It lessens the ability to hold government accountable by influencing what they see online, what they can see online. A lot of people writing to us over the past couple of weeks saying they're worried they won't be able to see our show, that they won't have access to the content that they see on a regular basis.
Well, if you look at the meeting notes that we just showed you and how law enforcement was really concerned about these cumulative blind spots, we missed how big this would be even when we were monitoring social media. You have to think that law enforcement then wants to close those blind spots, wants to be able to say, oh, we know exactly how big something's going to be because we're watching it and we have direct access to whatever you are doing on the internet. So we can even give a head count before the event happens.
Red Monkey says, yeah, don't upset the cognitive infrastructure. That's a phrase from last night's show.
Yeah.
Here's what Trudeau said about disinformation. I mean, he's been openly worried that disinformation is going to ruin Canada. Listen.
And that firmness is not just Western democracies like us. That is something that we've heard in our conversations, all three of us, with partners around the world who don't have the same kinds of ties to Ukraine, but are very, very concerned about the violation of the rule of law, the principle that suddenly might be right once again, the principle of territorial integrity, respect for sovereignty, the kind of neo-colonialism that Vladimir Putin is trying to impose upon Ukrainians. That's not going to fly. And the strength and the resolve of countries around the world to say, no, this is a moment to stand for democracy against disinformation, misinformation, propaganda, and to stay true to these values that have led to respect and prosperity around the world that we continue to need to fight for, including in many different parts of the world, whether it's Afghanistan or elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can seriously say you stand for democracy and then say that you need to censor speech.
Right.
That's
Well, he
misinformation.
forgot one of them too.
Which is
Now there's
malinformation.
misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
Malinformation.
Mal.
And they're calling it what? Disinformation. It's an acronym now, right? Or an initialism. I forget how it.
Is it already?
Yeah, it's already like MIB, DIB, dim, nut.
How do you make a distinction?
We're gonna have to bring back Schoolhouse. We'll have to bring back Schoolhouse Rock so they can do a bit on it so we can all remember it.
Right. There's a bill in Congress. It's yeah, I don't know what the hell it is, but and you know, we don't want to have any disinformation about Afghanistan. Like I love he puts in the Afghanistan piece, yeah, because we want to make sure that people don't know what a cluster F that was. So we need to make sure that we don't have any disinformation about what actually unfolded there between you guys. Like
That went exactly as planned.
right. Well, the only reason I don't know that it didn't go as planned because I didn't have disinformation in my way. So if you guys want to fight this bill in Canada, we'll have a link in the show description about this. Go ahead.
I was going to say dismissal. That's what it should be.
Yeah, Bismol. Did you take your Bismol? Your Dismismol?
Dismissal.
Your Pepto-Bismol?